Baden's. All right, Baden.
All right, cool. All right, so to kind of quick breakdown to the meeting, and we're already a little bit behind and there's a lot of things to cover, so we will try our best to kind of keep the pace going. The first one, registration, blah, blah, blah. And then first we're gonna kind of get like the why do we want to use Git and like what's the purpose of it and why what advantages does it have over other things you can do. Then we'll dive into and like what can you use it for specifically. Then we'll dive into kind of general concepts of version control, which is like kind of what Git is. And using it first, we'll first kind of focus on using it by yourself. And then we'll go into how you can use it with other people. So like, for example, in Fundies, you have partners and things like that. So using it with multiple people. And then we'll have kind of a Git walkthrough and kind of more things to go about like actually how you use it yourself. As well as, and that'll be kind of Q&A time where you guys can ask questions and kind of we'll give answers and feedback or whatever else you need. And then after at the end, we'll go ahead and do kind of a closing and yeah, some little bonus things as well. And then I'm not sure how much we'll be able to stick to the schedule, but we will try. So yeah.
One thing of note, so there are two like very broad ways to explain Git. There's the hand wavy, hey look, we're doing it, and then there's the like actually careful explaining it and letting you guys do it. And we went for the second one, which means that we might not get through everything, but we will send you the presentation afterwards. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes, but hopefully you understand everything and enjoy it.
Yeah, the goal of this is to be able to actually eventually use it yourself. Because we don't want to be like, okay, it exists, and then you don't know how to use it because then it doesn't help you. We want you to be able to actually use it. All right.
Why does this happen every week? The join leave sound is so annoying. Where is it?
It's whatever.
Yeah,
it's fine. Okay.
Okay, cool. Would you like to start, or would you?
Go for it.
Cool. All right. So what is Git and why is it important?
So yeah, sure. Right.
Okay. Has this ever happened to you before? For those of you who may not be able to see it, it is a screenshot of the desktop of a computer that has a bunch of files.
All with the same or similar names. Yeah. Draft, final, draft copy, new copy, final, and so on. For this, emailing code back and forth with a million different emails.
So obviously we want to avoid this. Many of you may have experience with this before. You knew about version control or anything like that. And so this is something you want to avoid. Many of you may have had problems specifically with doing things like emailing code back and forth and having different versions. It's difficult to figure out what version you're on, how to track the history, all things like that. And so it just makes life hard. But Git will help us avoid this. There's a little bit of a learning curve. We're going to do our best to explain it to you guys.
All right. So what is Git, or how does Git work and why is it important? It helps us to actually allow us to kind of track changes over time and kind of keep an actual history of the changes that we've made and revert back to an old version or kind of take off and like just do something different and then revert back. And so being able to actually have different versions of your code and also a timeline of your code. And it's also real, like that is like kind of the most basic thing you can do with Git, but Git is a very, very big thing. And there's a lot of things to get into with it. And the tech industry is like basically run on Git. Like everyone will use it, or some other version of version control, which is Git is a version of that. Yeah, it's a great thing to know, and it'll very much help you on your resume, and you will be using it in co-ops.
All right. So what is version control? And version control systems is the broader term. So a version control system is something that records the changes made to a file or set of files so that you can go back to specific versions later. So it's, if you can imagine something like Google Docs where you just kind of write things and it automatically saves, or saving documents on your computer, it's a little bit different from that. It allows you to very specifically know what you changed and when, and kind of go back and forth between different versions and have multiple people contribute, which makes it a little bit easier. You never have to think, oh, when did I add this thing? Because there's always a record when that happens. I think I may have just duplicated this. Yeah.
All right. So now, in a quick distinction between Git and GitHub, these are two very different things. So Git is the actual version control system or kind of protocol, like the different like commands and kind of way that you actually go about creating and using and kind of navigating within the version control, within the timeline and different kind of branches or different, versions. And GitHub is a website or kind of a server that allows you to remotely host and kind of house your code. And so that way, instead of having it just located on your computer, it can be located on the cloud. And that means that that's when it gets into the kind of collaborative aspect of, okay, I want to share my code with someone else. And I want them to be able to use it and add to it or do whatever other things like that. And so you should hopefully set up a GitHub account if you don't already have one. you can go to github.com and set one up if you have not done so already. All right.
But again, if this distinction is confusing, we will get into a little bit more later and get to use both, so you'll get to see them.
Yeah. And then also, like another thing with GitHub is because it's then you can make your repository public. So if you have some kind of project that you're working on, you're able to make that public, and then people who are like looking, like especially job interviewers or other people, and even if someone just like wants to like randomly look at your code, they can, if you have it public, that is, you can then basically anyone can go ahead and look at it, and even if they want to download it for themselves and try to like modify it and help you out as well. All right. Any questions so far? All right.
You might have questions later, but
yes. So far, just kind of the basics. All right.
All right. I can start us off with Git and version control concepts. So I mentioned Google Docs and writing code on your computer. And so those are things where when it saves everything. One thing that's unique about Git and other version control systems is that you tell it exactly what to save. You have to be pretty precise about that. So you can say, I just want to update one part of one file and have that happen. And when you make edits and you want to save them, you do something called adding changes. And so the important thing to note here is that instead of just kind of saving the whole file as one, when you save, it's like saving a couple lines at a time. So whatever you changed.
And that's
so,
also just to note, that's kind of under the hood stuff. For the most part, you can think about it as basically just being a newer version or an older version of your code.
yes,
Yeah.
but Git is a little bit special and things will come up later. But
yes,
it's a sort of thing to mention, but don't worry about it too much.
All right. All right, so the first thing that kind of one thing that's going to be the kind of core of where a lot of Git happens is on the terminal. And while there are a lot of ways to really use Git, there's plenty of like visual clients and things like that. The most universal way to do it and like the most like kind of basic way is through the terminal or through the command line. And so if anyone, maybe some of you are familiar, maybe some of you are not. The terminal is basically just a way of kind of actually talking or using the computer without any kind of visual interface or without any kind of like graphic GUI, rather just kind of using text.
Anytime you see somebody in a TV show or movie that's like hacking, they're probably using terminals.
Exactly, or the command line.
So we're going to tell you guys a little bit more about terminals, how they work.
And so one kind of base way to kind of understand it is a lot of what you're doing is basically the same thing you could do in a file explorer. In terms of navigating and looking at your different like actual files on the computer. But you can also do plenty more things, which we'll also then get into. And that's what Git is. Git is not actually just necessarily looking at files, but also then doing what we're doing with Git. All right.
So we'll try to make this not scary, but some of the words sound a little weird. And so if you haven't heard them before, we'll try to define them and not use them too much. So there is a word that is used very commonly called directory. It literally just means folder. I don't know why we use it. Maybe it's an old word, but it means a folder on your computer that's specified by something called a path. So if you've ever seen a bunch of words separated by slashes, that's what a path looks like. Yeah. And you can specify where something is. So it's kind of like file systems are like a bit of a tree. And so you can kind of specify where things are in there with the path. It looks a little weird if you haven't seen it before, but it's something that you kind of used to over time. There's also,
so it's essentially just nested directories, and like it looks slightly different on Mac or Linux or Windows. So the Mac and Linux version is kind of on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is the Windows version, which backslashes versus slashes and other things like that.
Some of us are on Squiggly and others of us are on C or whatever other ones you have for your hard drive.
All right.
And so something relevant to directories, now that we know what a directory is, there is a concept of a current directory or a working directory, and that's essentially where you are in your file system. So if you've ever been on your computer and opened like File Explorer in case Mac's Finder, and you can see a bunch of files, it's like that kind of in text form. And so that's the one that you have open. It's the one that if you make a new file, that's where it's going to go. And so current directory and working directory will be something that comes up a little bit, but again, not scary. And we'll make sure we explain it when this come up. When you want to make a folder, you can use a command that's called make directory, which is mkdir and then the name of the folder that you want to make. And that will just create a folder wherever you are currently in the file system. And then there's a command called change directory, which is cd, and that's how you switch between different folders. We will again I'll explain when they come up. But good to be aware of them before we see them.
All right, so some examples like in the command prompt, this is Windows, but it's this is similar to what you would see on pretty much any operating system. PWD is print working directory or print where you currently are. And so it says, and you can also see that the prompt, which is C:/test, which is a directory called test in my C drive on my computer. And so then that's basically saying, okay, C drive/test. And then ls is list all the contents of the directory. And so I have inside my test folder, I have an example folder, and then I can cd into example, and that will basically change my directory from the test folder into test/example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's like, this is kind of telling you where you are in text instead of being able to see like a list of things. And CDing, we changed our directory to moving. And so the reason why we see the things like ls and cd and they're a little bit confusing is because when you deal with computers, I'm on a job, you end up using these things a lot, so they abbreviate them to like E2 letters each.
Yes. Awesome. Any questions on terminal or command line or anything like that? There are some slight differences between Windows and Mac and Linux and stuff like that. For the most part, the core concepts are all the same though.
There's no such thing as a stupid question. All questions are valid. So please
Sure.
ask them if you have them. I was completely clueless about every single thing this entire presentation until maybe first semester my second year, maybe second semester my second year. So if you're a freshman, please ask.
Cool.
If we do not explain anything.
All right.
Very well.
All right, so one thing you can try, and this is like a demo thing if you want to try this, and to kind of get experience with it yourself if you haven't done it before, is opening a terminal. And so on Windows, you can do CMD or PowerShell. On Mac, there's, I think, a terminal application as well. Linux, you should probably be familiar with that if you're running Linux. If you're running Linux, probably all this is very, very much, whatever, old news. And you can create a new, it should by default bring you to your kind of home directory, which is usually the user that you are on your computer. So like on Windows, C/user/your username or whatever. Mac, it's just going to be the tilde, which is actually just /home/users or whatever, something like that. And so you can do a make dir and create a kind of a test project, and you can run pwd once you cd, or you can just test this all out yourself and see that you can do it yourself.
We will walk around the room and answer any questions. Just raise your hand. We'll give you like a minute to just try them. If you're referred to familiar with this, you'll be learning more from the next activity, but this is a brief one. So
Cool.
cool. What?
What's after this? All right.
You don't need to get much time.
Yes. All right. Okay, quick thing on Windows. What is on Windows? So dir is if you type dir, that will print out everything. What is that's not supported on this version. You can either look up what is Windows or that's all. And then I don't know if you can your MPD so now you can go ahead and do your account. So now you have yeah, we can actually make an announcement of that. Also, just quick note for everyone who's on Windows, mkdir for make dir is still a thing. The pwd is not a command that's on Windows, it's on Mac and Linux. The equivalent of you can usually see in your path. I'm forgetting what the actual command is for pwd, but you can usually see it in the prompt. And then and then also if you want to do ls to list everything in the directory, that's just going to be dir on Windows.
Yes, I forgot to include the Windows ones. I assumed everybody would be in Dash.
Yes, but not everyone is in Dash. So yeah. Yeah. On Windows, there is no equivalent to PWD. Like you see it in the command prompts, like we saw in the last one, says like C/whatever /user/user/user. All right.
All right, everybody, we are going to move to the next thing. Hope that you were able to.
Yeah.
make
If
a
you
little
weren't,
progress.
you can have, if you weren't able to get that all working, call one of the multi kind of keyboard over and we will try to help you individually. Yeah, we're going to continue moving on now because there's a lot of things to cover. All right. Cool. Okay.
All right. So hopefully we messed around enough with terminal stuff to have a little bit of familiarity, and we'll remind you of the recommendations so you don't have to worry about it too much. But now we're going to talk about how to use Git solo and a few relevant definitions. So our first thing that we'd like to talk about is something called a repository. And that is essentially a big place that hosts a lot of code. It's like a folder that has some bonus little Git nuggets thrown in there. And so this is what a repository looks like on the internet. And
Yeah.
it also on your computer just looks like a folder with extra stuff.
Yeah. So this is technically a remote repository, which we'll get into later, which is basically a repository that's on the internet, which we kind of talked about earlier. But for the most part, we're going to be starting with repositories that are on your computer. All right. So to create a new repository, there's the command git init. And so Git is basically, assuming you have Git installed, basically how you'll be able to do this is any command that we like, whenever you have git init or any other kind of command, you prefix it with git because that's the actual like program that's running on the command. And so you say git, and then the first argument is init. And so in this case, it's just going to basically say, okay, wherever you are right now in your terminal, it's going to turn that into a Git repository. And so what that actually means in terms of the actual like what's happening under the hood is it's creating a new folder called .git, which is going to store all the kind of information about, okay, what's the previous versions and things like that. And so you can see here ls and -a is basically saying show everything. So by default, anything that starts with a dot is hidden just to make things cleaner for you. On Windows, if you do dir, I think it does actually show everything. In this case, ls doesn't show everything. ls-a does. So I have an example file code.rkt, which is our racket file. And then we git init, and it'll create an empty repository at the current directory. And then we can ls and see that we have our new repository. And so that's basically the only thing you need to do to really set this up.
So once you have a repository set up, then you can start using the other Git commands that we have. So the first one that's worth mentioning is called git add. And it does something called staging changes, which is when you make changes, before it saves them, you can kind of put them in a temporary place. That's what adding does. And then after they're in the temporary place, you can do something called committing, which if you haven't used it before, you might have heard that word, but not know what it means. And that will be what we explain next.
Yeah.
So
I get the way that I also like to explain this is in terms of because like we said before, usually when you save something, you can you basically save everything by default. There's no way to save some things or save some files or not others. In this case, you can choose which things you want to save to your version history. And so the way that you choose which things you want to save is with add. You say, okay, I want to add these specific files. I want to be actually keeping track of these and what the different versions of these. And so if you don't add them, then you're not actually keeping track of them in terms of your saving or your history or any kind of different versions. Perfect. All right, so the next term is status. So git status is a command that will just say, okay, are there any things that I need to save? So, or in this case, kind of commit. We're going to use kind of commit and save interchangeably because they have essentially the same meaning here. For the most part, the actual terminology is commit. But so basically we want to say, okay, what is based on kind of the what's happening in the whole repository and the whole history, have I made any new changes beyond that right now? And so that once you have added it, then it'll say, okay, so for example, in this one, we add it first to the repository. So now we're tracking our code.racket file we're adding that to the things that we want to actually keep track of. And then we say git status, and it says, so there's no commits yet. Which means that we haven't actually saved anything to our version history. And then we can actually to commit it, or we'll get into that in a second, but basically this is saying we have a new file, code.racket, which we have not saved yet. All right. And it also tells you other things like being kind of up to date, or if you are with the current version of the repository, as well as we'll then get into remote stuff later, but we're not going to worry about that for now.
Status kind of helps you see where you are and what you're doing. And so it is a cool thing to do before you kind of make any significant changes to stuff.
Yeah, you can see, okay, making sure that you know what you're doing rather than being like, okay, I'm blindly like trying to do this, and it can tell you what's going on. All right. Any questions about those first, I guess, like 3 commands of Git, initializing the repository, adding, and then checking the status?
I list them. Oh, no. Just. Also,
All right.
we can answer questions when we're back in small groups in a few.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
So to try it, since you just created a repository, or sorry, a new folder on your computer with makedir, try now if you cd into it, so cd and then the name of the folder, then you can go ahead and initialize the repository with Git init, and this will work if you have Git installed on your computer. Windows, it should, if you install it correctly, it should work. If not, maybe there's like a Git back. We'll come around. Try doing this now and creating a new file, and then being able to add that and stuff like that. All right, go ahead and try that now. Come around. Were you able to do it? Exactly, perfect. Initialize the repository, and from there, if you want to create a new file, you can try doing you can also do echo something, and then do the right there. So like echo, and then do like that hello world, and then do right here. Yeah. And then now give the file name. So they can do like hello. Now you can see you have a file. It doesn't have file extension. And so now if you want to try adding that, you can do git add on below. Okay. Yep. And now it's added. So you can now try doing git status. See exactly. Now you have. We're going to be keeping this file hello. So right now we not see
That's a great question.
Okay, yeah.
Where is it? Oh, damn. I'm not, I can't.
Yeah, we should. I don't know how to. Have they posted any questions in chat or anything? We should. What can I see here? Zoom people, any questions in that you could put in chat or come on mic for? Why can't I move this? Yeah.
Any questions so far, anyone? You can put
Okay,
in
we
the
see
chat.
one. Oh, so far
Great.
so good. All right,
Perfect.
cool. Yeah, if you have any issues at any point, please send them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them as soon as we see them.
Are you guys hearing everything okay also?
Yeah, how is sound and stuff? Hopefully decent. Cool.
Okay, good. Perfect. Great.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Thank you. Thank you for the
I mean, it is what it is. It's kind of a nightmare because it's like, okay, Linux is different than Windows, which is also technically Linux is different than Mac OS. They're similar, but they're not the same, which is just so nice. All right.
All right, everyone, we're gonna try.
Yeah. Can you resign?
Yeah, so right now, we're gonna saving. All right, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and circle back, and if you haven't finished, you can keep working, but we're also gonna continue moving on. So, all right, we get everyone's attention. All right, we're gonna keep going.
All right. So now that we have learned how to add files, start a repo, add files and look at the status, now we can do something called committing. And committing is essentially saying, hey, save the changes that I just added. So it's how you save changes that we've added, and command looks like this: git commit something called -m, which is
A flag?
essentially saying it's a flag, which is a weird command line term, but all it means is we want to add a message to the commit. So then you add something in quotes, and that's kind of like the caption on a photo
Yeah.
on Instagram or something. It's like, we made a bunch of changes. Now we want to describe them a little bit for future sake, like sake of the future. And that's what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and so then, yeah, go ahead. And then, so then you guys, while we're also doing this, feel free to try it yourself. Once you've actually, so once you added the files, then you can do commit. All right. So then another command we can do is reset, which is a little bit, I guess a little bit more advanced, but it basically, it allows you to do a couple different things. The first thing is, let's say you added a file and you're like, actually, I don't want to, everything that I've added so far, I don't want to actually be saving. Like, let's say you added some garbage file that you actually don't want to be keeping track of. You can do git reset, and that will basically unadd it. Once you added it, then you can do git reset to unadd it. There's also a command we'll get to later on, which is git reset with --hard, which will basically actually go ahead and remove the actual basically remove the previous save and go to the previous version. And if you do --hard with capital head and then tilde and then a number, that'll be basically how many commits or how many saves far do you want to go back. And so to go basically to if you want to basically get rid of it, so you made some change and you're like, actually, this is all garbage, I don't want to do this. You can then do git reset --hard with head of tilde1, and that will basically take you back to the previous commit. So if you've now made the first commit, make some changes, you add and then commit again, then you can do a reset back to the previous one. All right.
It takes a little bit of getting used to understand how like the timelines stuff work, but we'll try to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it's just like, oh no, I made a bunch of things that were bad. And then hopefully you committed recently, and so you can move back to the previous one.
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll pause for questions on committing, resetting, or anything else so far. We will give you a chance to do it in a minute. So.
All right.
we can also answer it as we work around.
Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and try it. So now hopefully you have created your initial repository, created a file, and you go ahead and added it, and then you can check the status. Now try doing your git commit with a -m and give it some name like initial commit or whatever else you want. Hello. It can do whatever you want for the message.
And if you have not gotten to this point yet and you're stuck on some earlier stage, raise your hand and we will come help you correct.
Yes.
Because we don't want to leave this behind.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll give you a few minutes.
You're able to do it? Okay, so this one. Yeah, so you only want and then now, you'll want to and then give name of mouse and do like color.
Yeah, I really think the web No, I didn't know this is the file. Let's start with Sure. So one thing you can do is to tell you what Yeah, we're like. And then type something in there. Okay. Cool, now we can go back to. So we can go back to the terminal. So we do git add. So git space add and then another space in the file. Yeah, and we type the first one, press the tab button on the left of your keyboard and you have to start typing the name of the file. Yeah, let's try this. I don't want to. Oh, so we just want the name of the file. So I think we call it however, so type HAL and then hit the tab keyboard, type key. Oh, the one. This one, and then it will automatically clear the rest of it. Yeah, so it like makes things a little bit easier. If you enter and then do git space status. No, you don't have to do yeah, just get started. Now it says it's in green, which means we added it successfully. So now we can do what's on the board. Yeah, this one.
Yes, Git status is an application. If you choose, you can see things are still there. To get status, there is basically what exists. Yeah, so is there anything that's changed? Yeah. I don't think there's.
Any questions from any of our friends on Zoom? Let me know in the chat, or I don't know if I'll be able to hear you on mic, so you should probably send it in the chat if you do have any. We've had a bunch of questions around here, so definitely ask if you have them. All right, cool. Can we go back to? All right, everybody, we're going to Zoom. We have 15 minutes and we're going to see how much cool stuff.
Oh boy, 15 minutes? Speed run
15 more
time.
minutes.
Okay, all right, we're gonna keep going.
I can start us off.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. I thought somebody said my name. All right, cool. So now that we know how to use Git by ourselves, which is pretty great because you can use it for projects. A lot of you, if you're in fundies or OD or whatever classes where you have to do programming, you will have to use Git collaboratively with a partner, or rather you don't have to use Git, but you want to. And so we're going to try to teach you guys how to do that. So the first thing that is of note is that there's something called, there are two words that are important, remote and local. So when we collaborate with another person, we shouldn't just save the code on both our computers, it should be saved somewhere else. And we can store it somewhere on the internet, which is what GitHub is for. So local is a word that's used to describe when code is stored on your computer somewhere.
It's what you just created.
Yeah, what you just created on your computer. So you guys have locals. And then now we're going to set up something called a remote, which is where your code is stored on the internet. And so that's when we get GitHub to work this way.
Perfect.
Cool.
So an example of one thing you can do with remote repositories is if we saw before, we had an example on like the first thing of a GitHub repository or a GitHub remote repository. And so what you can do if there's a repository that's on the internet, instead of like clicking download source code and saving to your computer or whatever, from the command line or from Git, you can just do git clone and then there's a Git link, and that will basically just copy the whole thing from the cloud or from whatever onto your computer, and you can then use it locally on your own computer. All right.
So we included an example link there just for show, but we will give you guys an activity where you can actually do it with a friend. So whoever you're sitting next to, assuming both have computers or otherwise, but we'll figure it out.
Cool.
All right. So I'll describe this because I made this slide and it's a little bit
Do we have time for
chaotic.
this?
So we have two partners ideally. And so partner A and partner B. Partner A, we're going to have you create a new public repository on GitHub, which requires an account. So ideally pair up so that at least one of you has an account. The other partner can go in terminal, exit their project folder by using the command cd ... Then make a new folder by running the make dir command, which I can show you guys.
You can actually just git clone and it'll clone
That's
it
true.
into a new
That's
directory.
right. Okay, so we can just clone from the thing. So ignore step 2, but you can have partner A tell you what their Git username is and what they name their repo, which should be multi-project if they follow the things we have on the slides. And then all you have to do, pardon me, is run git clone and then the link that goes to the
which should
repository.
end in .git.
Yes.
Right.
And then it should magically get your code onto your computer.
Since we're running low on time, I think we will have, if you guys want to try this out, go for it, but we're going to continue going. You can feel free to kind of stick around after and do this yourself. All right. And so this gets into now, how do we use Git we've now been able to use our local stuff. How do we actually go ahead and both or kind of interact with the remote repository? And so the first thing we have here is called pull or git pull. And so what you have is when you have your remote repository, that could be, let's say your partner went ahead and did their changes, and then they've now put them on the repository, which we'll get into in just a second. Assuming that the cloned version that you have on your computer is now behind, it doesn't automatically update. So what you need to do to update it is git pull, which will basically pull all the changes and all the new kind of features that have been added down into your local version of the code. And so this is kind of one of the basic things for using it with other people. All right.
And then the opposite of pull is push. So when you've made changes on your computer and you want to send them to this remote repository that's on GitHub or wherever else it's being hosted, you can use git push. So the process would be adding your files, then making a commit, and then pushing your commits. And we will have an activity described, but I don't know if we'll have time for you to go through it. So we might just fly through it, but we will send you the slides if you're interested. They'll be in our mailing list. We might just send them out after the meeting as well.
Perfect. And there's also plenty of resources online. If you ever get confused, definitely Google things. Google is your friend.
Yes.
All right. Any questions on the difference between remote and local, and then pulling and pushing and things like that? Okay. Yeah, and there's also, especially if you create your repository on GitHub, you'll often have like a lot of instructions on like what things you can do to actually make it sure or to set everything up for yourself. All right. We would try with a friend. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time. What time is it?
10.
Okay, so we'll continue going. Another term which we're not going to get into today, we're not going to like do it actually have you guys test it out today. But something that you'll often encounter is a merge conflict.
Sure. So merge conflicts is something that might come up if you are like, oh my gosh, I should use Git and fundies, and like you and your partner set it up, you're super excited, and you're both working on the same thing, and then you try to do like committing and stuff, and it says, oh wait, you can't. It's gonna merge conflict, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And so there are a couple different ways to fix it. If you Google it, there will be good processes. But what we're going to teach you next will make it so that you don't ever have to worry about merge conflicts ideally. And so we'll kind of skip over it, but it is something to be aware of. And don't be scared. It's just something that you can kind of.
We mentioned that, but this happens especially if you're like both working on different versions and you have different like whose version is best, and which things do you want to add and which things do you don't want to add. And so that's when you have conflicts. But if you're working like fundies where you're working like together and you want to basically be able to transfer between computers, then in that case, you're only working on one computer at a time and you don't have to worry about merge conflicts.
Yes, something to be aware of, but hopefully you don't end up seeing them. And they are something you can resolve. So another term that we can talk about is branches. And so this is when things start to get a little bit complicated, but we'll do our best. So a branch is just a timeline of changes that have been made to your code. And as you can imagine by the name of it being a branch, there may be multiple branches. And so we have something that's called the main branch. It used to be called the master branch, but that word kind of sucks. So it's been changed to main. The primary timeline of changes is called main. And so it's kind of what you guys have so far. If you run git branch on terminal, you'll see it will just say main or the same. So what we're going to do next is show you guys how to create another branch, which allows you to add a better description of this on the next slide.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, so say you wanted to make changes to your code without changing the main version of the code, the main branch of the code. So maybe you want to add a feature, fix a mistake. Maybe you passed most of the checker tests and you're like, I don't want to break everything. Let me just make a branch that things can be separate. It's kind of like when you used to say, oh, my project is working. I'm going to copy all my code into a separate file and then keep working. Yeah. So this is kind of a replacement for that.
And a visual representation of this, let's say we have our first commit, and then we made some changes, and now we made another commit. And then let's say we want to now have a temporary pause on the main things that we're doing and just try some kind of random thing. We can then do git branch with the branch name or git checkout -b with the branch name, and that'll create us into a new branch. And then from there, we can then start working on this branch and continue going here. And we'll get how to actually then from here, how do you get back into like the main area and have that as your actual code base?
Yes, great. So that is the plan for it. Again, we'll send you guys the slides if you want a chance to do it right now. So Ava created this great illustration of how branches look. And one thing to be aware of is that you kind of have like a current location that you're at. You're either on one branch or you're on the next branch. And so in order to work on one or work on another, you have to switch between them. The command to do that is git switch and then the name of a branch. So if you are on a branch that is called like Ava branch, you could say git switch main and it will switch you back to the
Yeah, so
branch.
when you create a new branch, you by default become on that branch, like you're in that kind of like area. And then if you want to switch back to the old branch, you could then, go get branch back to, or sorry, get checkout, or sorry, get switch back to the main branch. And that will then say, okay, well, now we're going back to here. So now we're at this place in the main.
Yes. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about main branch switching or anything else so far?
All right.
Cool. And again, you're welcome to ask us afterwards or in one-on-ones when we try to work around.
Again, we would try this with Ren, may have overestimated the amount of time we had.
Yes.
So now with branch, so like this is an example, get switch from main. And then we can, now the other thing you can do is if you want to, let's say we've now created our second branch, which in this case we call branch one as an example name. If you want to actually go back to if you want to actually, so we've made our changes, we're like, okay, this is a good feature, we want to keep this. We want to merge that back. We want to basically add that to combine our two branches together. The way to do that is with git merge. And so git merge will allow you to basically, once you switch back to this branch, so now you switch back to here. And so if you git merge, you've made your commit in your branch. You switch back to your main branch. And if you do git merge and then the branch name, it'll basically say, okay, let's go ahead and merge this back. And this will be the next commit on our kind of commit timeline for our main branch like this.
One thing that really confused me about how merges work when I was first learning them and I messed it up a bunch of times is that to merge, you have to switch back to where you want the merge to go and then say merge the name of the thing where you want to pull the changes from. So like in this case, switch back to the main branch and then merge the feature branch, the one you created that has some new stuff in it.
Perfect. All right.
Awesome. Ava, thank you for the illustration.
All right. And so if any of you were probably curious about how do we actually, well, if we committed it and we want to know, okay, well, what's the actual version history? Like we've been talking about version history, but we've never actually been able to see the history. So the way to do that is with the git log command. And so by default, the git log prints out a whole bunch of stuff. And there's probably more information than you actually need to see, like the git ID numbers and things like that, and kind of more information. But if you want to see it all in one line, there's that command. If you actually Google, there's like a really pretty way you can see it in terms of like, it'll make it as like an actual graph and like make a whole bunch of stuff, but you can Google for that command. This is kind of the rudimentary way of actually seeing the history with git log.
All right. Any questions about merging logs or anything else so far? Again, we can answer them one-on-one afterwards if you want to ask them.
We will continue now. All right. Don't have time for that.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll go over this quickly. You want to just go quick?
Sure. So something that you may have heard of if you have been exposed to a software team, something you might hear of when you go on something called a pull request. And so we told you guys about branching and how branches work. It's sort of like you flow in the whole code that you're working on. You make a branch in your computer, and then you're like, okay, I want to merge this branch back into the main code, but I need somebody to like look at it and review it. And like my boss might say, hey, you did this wrong, you should fix this, whatever. Maybe you should add more code, add more tests, whatever it is. And so you can make something called a pull request, which is like, hey, I made a bunch of changes on a branch. Please accept these back into the main of the code. And so pull requests are made online, and there's a nice interface for them. I probably should have included an image that we can show you, but it essentially allows somebody else who's reviewing your code to make comments on it, change it, and then you can fix the branch, and eventually they approve it, and then you can merge your pull request. It sounds kind of confusing, but something that's worth being aware of. I didn't know what it was until I was on co-op and somebody said, hey, have you ever made a pull request before? And I said, no, please tell me how to do this. So it's good to be aware of, but if you don't understand.
Also with Git stuff in general, it's the best way to learn it is just by practice. And so if you're like, okay, I'd honestly recommend doing it for like your homeworks and things like that. That way you can get the hang of it. And that way, especially there's plenty of ways to like, or Google, if you Google it, you'll probably find like a Stack Overflow post with like 5,000 upvotes or whatever. So there's going to be plenty of resources out there if you are ever confused about how to do something with Git. But definitely recommend practice is key. All right. So now we're gonna close from here. One other thing I actually do want to mention, and this is kind of this isn't really covered by the scope of this presentation, but VS Code has an extension called Live Share. So that's kind of diving into a whole another topic, but I highly recommend that, especially for collaboration. It essentially allows you to do things like we talked about in terms of Google Docs, like revision history. VS Code Live Share allows you to literally like have a Google Docs where you basically, whatever you're working with, the code that you're working on can also be accessed from your partner's computer. And so you can basically modify this all the code at the same time. Highly recommend it. Definitely look into it. If you're curious more about that, come see me after and I'm happy to give you more information. Yeah, anything else you want to add?
It's great for finding to and beyond. In Rocket Land, it might be a little bit more difficult
Yeah.
because of weird stuff. But again, if you're interested, we can talk to you about it.
Perfect. All right, cool. And there's plenty more kind of resources online, like we said. There's a tutorial in case you want to get more practice with the branching kind of stuff we talked about here, which does get a little bit complicated, but yeah, there's some guides here, some GitHub guides. It's complicated, but there are resources out there, and it's a really helpful thing to have. Thank you. All right.
All right. We hope that you enjoyed and that you learned something along the way. If you have questions for us, we're always happy to answer them right now or in the future. And we will send out presentations, so hopefully that helps as well. If you would like to give feedback, please scan the QR code. I think it's just a Google form where you can say, hey, this was cool, this wasn't cool, whatever, and then we will do our best to improve for next week.
Yeah, and again, apologies, we were kind of rushed for time, especially just because there's so much to cover. So especially, and I definitely recommend to actually try these out yourself. A lot of things we'll have the slides available for download. I don't know where you want to mention that.
We can send them to email.
Yeah, they'll be in the newsletter. So if you ever want to like take a look at the slides and kind of go through the actual like try it out yourself, please do that. It's very helpful to kind of get started. And again, yeah, definitely highly recommend using Git. Cool.
Yes. And if you're in a class that's programming based and you have TAs and you say, hey, I'm using Git, I don't know how to do it. There's a good chance they know how to do it. You can answer your questions.
Yeah.
We'll be really happy to use it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Also, if anyone has additional questions, you can send them in the Slack. If you guys are not familiar with Slack, it's our messaging platform. It's the nemulti.slack.com. All the e-boards, tons of numbers are in there, so you definitely will be able to get help with any Git related or anything else related questions that you have.
We've all gone through the stage of not knowing to knowing, and we know what it's like, so we're always happy to answer questions.
Cool.
And we're still learning ourselves. There are all sorts of things you can do with Git that I haven't need to.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Where are we sharing the presentation?
So it'll be in the newsletter, I think, and also probably on Slack. If you have to read the newsletter or if you join Slack.
Stop the recording, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Great job.
That was great.
Great, yeah.